to be interpreted.
Right. But, he provided evidence, fodder, and talking points to both parties to use in their defense of their claim, and that's exactly what they did. So we haven't really gotten anywhere in terms of building a bridge where we're going to have a strong two-thirds coalition on either side of the impeachment issue, which I think is what America should hope for. But
and that's the big takeaway from all the testimonies is people say, one guy will say one thing, and then somebody else who's also on the phone call will get a different, like, it's impeachable, it's not impeachable, and even Sondland, within his own testimony, is giving ammo to both sides. So even with more evidence coming to light, nothing's really changing with regards to how anybody sees it.
It's important to have these, national security, foreign policy aides come up forward and speak in front of Congress, the ones that were involved on this issue, because every person has a unique opinion to provide on the issue of impeachment and, what are the right ways and wrong ways to handle foreign policy. And it's all going to be different, but we need to weigh all those different opinions and then decide, whether or not this is an impeachable offense and what exactly we think the facts are. And so it's been interesting to see that Trump's support has actually had a slight uptick in terms of his approval rating, and that support for impeachment has ticked slightly down by the American people. But I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that this is a difficult, issue, and they haven't had one big, smoking gun, shining star that they can point to as, here, this is it. And so, we'll see if the Democrats in Congress stick with it, but
it's becoming more and more clear that this is an impeachment battle is going to be won on marketing.
Right.
That whichever side can best market their points to the American people and can convince the most people will end up winning. And the threshold for Democrats is much more difficult. Reflecting on Nixon's imminent impeachment, the Republicans within his own party did not begin to turn on him until he entered the high 20s in his approval rating. And Trump is not going to get there anytime soon. If the Democrats need to convince essentially two-thirds of the country, the same amount required in the Senate for removal, that this is an impeachable offense and that he should be removed from office for any action to actually occur. If they're unable to convince those people, Trump's not going to be removed from office, and based off prior evidence, they should be afraid that it might help him in the 2020 election.
And 35% of America, no matter what is unearthed in this, are going to stand by Trump and say he's not going to be impeached. And that's the lowest he's going to get, realistically.
Very difficult.
My thoughts are that chances, the best way for Democrats to market their case, at this point, considering where everything is to have Trump testify and hope that he talks himself into a hole, because, I think there are some shady things that have been undertaken in the administration, and a lot more people will watch it coming from the horse's mouth, and a lot more people that aren't very much politically inclined will see the Trump name testifying and, will tune into that more so than they will Gordon Sondland or, any of these other guys.
Yeah, but then something crazy can also happen at the end of the day. It's really 20 senators in question who they have to flip as opposed to the whole country. So 20 minds to change, even though they're all smart, informed, partisan people, it's easier for me to see that happening than public opinion for Trump.
Yeah, I don't think public opinion is going to shift below his. I think 35% is the ceiling or the floor for President Trump.
But I don't think the Democrats have any chance unless they can get him to that floor. If he has 35% support and the rest of the people are pushing for impeachment, if it ends up being 65-35 in favor, then the Democrats have a chance.
Right, yeah, but I have a really hard time seeing him being impeached by the Senate now, because I think that, removed, excuse me, from the Senate now. I think that, based on the talking points that they've established, it would be inconsistent of them to then vote for impeachment and to remove, and the Democrats have no, chance of, building on the established talking points of the Republican.
Well, I think the one opportunity they have is if they can get one or two of those leaners, or not even leaners, but the 20 that they're really looking to get, if Lisa Murkowski, for example, were to come
Romney comes out and support of
then I think you could see a domino effect in which more Republican senators consider it.
Yeah, maybe.
And I think that's the most realistic. Yeah, that's the most
if they see a senator
way.
come out and support impeachment and then not really get hurt within the Republican Party, in terms of internal polling for their reelection bids and in terms of the committee's reaction to that and donations and all that stuff, then that might be more enticing, because there are certainly some things that you can point to plenty of Republican senators disliking in policy about the Trump administration.
Yeah. But the odds are those 20 people are not going to each independently change their minds. It would take one of them to take the leap and have it turn out all right, and then the rest of them would follow
and
suit.
No one seems to want to take that leap right
it's
now.
not going to happen.
I'll be interested to see, like, since we're nearing an election, like whether the Democrats even proceed with the vote if they continue to not make up any ground in the coming weeks, like whether or not they just decide that we're going to put the choice in the hands of the American people in 2020, because I did hear some Democrats prior to the whole impeachment inquiry even being started saying, like, sure, he did something wrong, but I think it's unwise. Like, this is a very undemocratic thing to do, to take the vote away from the American people and put it in the hands of 100 senators to decide who the next president is going to be. And so I could see them, making that pitch and that being something that they use as an advertisement for their election bid in 2020. And that's kind of what Representative Brenda Lawrence from Illinois said, and she came out sort of against impeachment. She initially came out stronger, saying that she wanted to censor as opposed to physically impeaching Trump, but she kind of walked it back and said that she supports the inquiry, but she just doesn't see the point in removing him from office, considering how close we are to an election. She just thinks that it's a futile endeavor and the resources are better spent elsewhere, which I think is probably a valid point and something that most Democrats would agree with if they don't see a path to the Republicans removing him.
Well, I think
they don't want to provide him with fodder or anything like that for his 2020.
Although overall, I think that was calculated into them moving forward with it at all. I think.
Yeah, but
I think it's too late. Just overall, like, you might have a few Brendas, for example, who come out and no longer support it, but overall, I think that ship has sailed and they're going to move forward just for the attention. I mean, it's not hurting them.
All the pain
it might,
they've
though,
gained.
Because if you think about it this way, like you said, and you're right, in order to get him impeached and in order to swing public favor, you're going to have to market it. So,
well, they never thought he was actually going to be impeached. Their whole thing was removed from office. The whole thing was, we're just going to make him look bad going into 2020.
I don't think so at all.
That's
I don't
what
think that you start an impeachment inquiry if you don't think that there's a shot at removing him from office.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I think you don't start an impeachment inquiry if you think it's going to help the sitting president.
Yeah, I don't think. No one.
Well,
no one
guys,
would look at you with a straight face and say, "I think Donald Trump will be removed from office." I think
they thought that they had the evidence to convince the public that this was a high crime and misdemeanor and he should be removed from office. You have the majority of Democrats and the majority of Democratic senators, if not unanimous amount of both, that believe that this is an impeachable offense.
Yeah, 100%.
Sure.
What I'm saying is,
if they really genuinely didn't believe that there was a pathway to him being removed from office, they wouldn't have started the inquiry, because if they were willing to just start an inquiry for the sake of starting an inquiry, they would have done it after the Mueller investigation.
No, him being removed from office is the 2020 election to them. They started it this late because they want that going into 20. Like, they never. His ultimate removal
Pelosi was
from
extremely
office.
hesitant to start impeachment proceedings because she didn't want this to turn into a Clinton situation where it hurts them in the upcoming election.
I guess to talk about Clinton, your point that going into impeachment, you don't do it unless you think there's a path to removing the president. Do you think Republicans thought there was a path to removing Bill Clinton for office on perjury charges?
No, and the Democrats learned their lesson from that, and that's why Pelosi was hesitant to start the impeachment proceedings.
All right, that's fair.
She knew that there was nothing there. What? Go ahead.
What do you mean, what?
What?
What do you mean, what?
You laughed, so what's your...
I think it's very clear that no one thought Donald Trump was going to be removed from office. I thought that was a pre-established thing. There's no way they thought that they were going to get 20 senators to do it. I think they wanted to present the evidence because they felt it was the right thing to do, and they wanted to bring it forward and let the people decide.
Okay, you can talk about whether or not in the back of her mind she believed that 20 senators were going to vote for removal from office, but Pelosi believed genuinely that this was a high crime and misdemeanor and that it was a disservice to the American people not to bring impeachment forward.
I agree with that. I just don't think she ever thought it was going to lead to removal from office. But
if you're saying that she just did it as a political tactic, which is false, because if she was just using impeachment as a political tactic, she would have done it after the Mueller report, like Maxine Waters, and plenty of other
No,
Democrats
that's
wanted
too
her
far.
to do.
That's too far away from the election.
That would have still been a political tactic, though, James.
Yeah, but
you can argue that it would be far more politically advantageous, especially with the number of senators that are on the campaign trail for the Democratic primary right now.
Well, that's the other thing that we talked about the other
Yeah.
time is that if the 5 senators or whatever it is that are campaigning for president have to sit in 5 days a week working 12-hour days with the impeachment trial, that's not going to benefit their campaign.
Not at all.
No, not at
So
all.
that's not a political tactic in and of itself.
Yeah, but if Donald Trump is removed from office, they win.
But you just said no one actually believes that.
They won't. But I think if he is successfully impeached and tried in the Senate, I think it'll actually hurt him. And I think that's what they want. If he's hurt badly enough, it doesn't matter who it matters.
I don't know about that. And
well,
plus,
if you
the other
ensure
thing
a
is
Joe
that
Biden
I think
victory, if you ensure a Joe Biden victory by running the trial, that's probably what
I don't
the
think
DNC
a trial
wants
ensures a Joe Biden victory
in the primary.
I don't know about that, but I think generally,
I guess that's true, and I think that would help the DNC. But I don't think that was a consideration when they started the impeachment proceedings. That'll get Joe over the top.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, they wanted to get this over with pretty quickly, I think.
Because that would be a pretty crappy look for most of their voter base if it came out that was what they wanted to happen, and especially after how bad 2016 panned out for them with the whole screwing Bernie. Yeah. But I'm just saying, it might be a misallocation of resources if you're trying to market impeachment and you're trying to market your candidate for 2020. You got to pick one, and so they might recognize at a certain point, we're running against a wall here, so we're just going to give up this and focus all our efforts on this is the candidate for 2020. Because in some ways, the Republicans can use the trial of Trump as marketing for Trump as their candidate in 2020 on the opposite end of the argument, and Trump can use it as marketing for himself.
Yeah,
so it's not going to play for Democratic voters, but if the Democrats are marketing anti-Trump and the Republicans are marketing physically Trump, it gets no name recognition to somebody that's not involved in the impeachment proceedings, like Biden or whoever the nominee ends up being.
If you're a Democratic strategist,
I'm saying you're better served propping up Biden than you are trying to just fight Trump and talk about the proceedings in the Senate and completely ignoring his candidacy. So it's not feasible to market two things at the same time.
Right. I might make the calculation that if I can successfully sway public opinion against President Trump during the trial, it doesn't matter how much I marketed Joe Biden.
But as a strategist, you have to be a realist and realize that you're not going to be able to do that.
Not be able to sway public opinion. If you accept the 35 plus 5, I guess, if you accept that 40% is probably President Trump's floor on people in favor of removal.
Right, so what tactics are you going to bring in the trial in the Senate to get it to that level?
Well, I think they're thinking just having it at all is going to make them look bad. I think
it's not going to bring them to 40%, though.
Doing
that is not alone going to win them the 2020 election. I think we can all agree on that.
100%. But I think they started this thinking it would bring them down, and then sort of crossed their fingers and said maybe something will come out. Why not, sort of thing. And we know that it's a political calculation, but
I think it's an impeachable offense. He's not going to get removed from office, but I think it's an impeachable offense. There are plenty of Democrats that do, and there are some Republicans. I mean, you were with me on this at least.
Course.
I know you don't believe so, but you're kind of 1 foot in the tub, 1 foot out of the tub.
I think we need the inquiry, and I think we need to bring the evidence forward, but I'm not all the way convinced yet that he should be removed from office.
But if I were a Democrat, if I were Nancy Pelosi right now, I would be more likely than not to not hold the vote, because
you actually think that by not holding the vote and not having the trial, it benefits them more than you don't think the damage is done if impeachment's going to hurt them?
I think that it benefits them more from a public standpoint for her to make a big speech saying about they want to let the American people decide in 2020 and have the decision not rest on the opinion of the 400 some odd members of Congress on who the president is, and they recognize that while this is an impeachable offense, they have an uphill, in her mind, they have an uphill climb to physically removing him from office, and they would rather conserve their energy and use it to, propel their candidate to be the choice of the American people in 2020.
Yeah,
I think that would win way more public favor than actually holding the trial and, increasing polarization and fighting with people in the Senate.
Yeah,
I don't know about that. I'm not entirely convinced that something else won't come out of the trial that would be equally damaging.
But who is going to have something more than what Sondland has?
I think just to pile on, I don't think there could be anything worse, but I think 5 things of
5 people saying what Sondland said.
Not even more people testifying on that. But if they end up getting their hands on his tax returns, that could be an issue for President Trump as well, and that could come out of the trial.
That's true.
Yeah, I guess.
I think what Owen's saying is that's like more cross your fingers and see what happens, and they're looking for more
and
like
that's not what the impeachment is supposed to be either.
Yeah, that's true.
No, but I think we're a long way from that.
Right. Well, the whole thing's just like a political calculation. So if that's what they're willing to do, then they do it. Although I think another thing that's important is
you're saying that like it's a given fact that impeachment is a political calculation, but I don't think that's necessarily accepted.
No, I think
I agree with you personally.
I think the inquiry was right, just morally the right thing to do to bring the evidence forward. But I think the whole impeachment process
I'll give you that
launched.
It was a combination, but I don't believe that it was a solely political calculation.
Yeah, I mean, in the sense that, again, I guess you and I disagree on this, but in the sense that there was never a real chance that Trump gets removed, it was a political calculation. But I also think they felt it was the right thing to do, even if it wouldn't bear any fruit. That's what I'm sort of saying. And I think that it could look bad. And I mean, if Pelosi gets up there and says what you said, I think they sort of avoid this, but just broadly speaking, it could look bad for the Democrats if all of a sudden they bail out on the impeachment without some sort of explanation or something, because then it looks like they've given up.
Well, that's a much better defeat than it if they say like we don't believe that we have the evidence necessary to impeach him.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be a disaster.
But I think people might take that implication.
Yeah, so I think that's also a risk in doing that, whereas taking it to the Senate and losing, when you know you're supposed to lose, and everyone knows it's not going to happen, and then they can say, we tried, we gave it our all, you have to do what these senators can't, and I think that's pretty compelling to most people, like, my government isn't serving me, I think this guy should be removed, so now I'm going to go out and do it
there's
myself.
that too, that's fair.
And I think that them pulling out at this point is a risk within itself, and that people might say, well, if they can't even find the evidence that Trump would be or should be impeached, why should I go out there and do it myself? I mean, not myself, but collectively.
Well, but she's making her pitch to the American people that it's not just about this one issue.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
and it's not that he committed a high crime and misdemeanor. It's that he's not the right choice for the job, which they have a lot more that they can make an argument about for that case that they can't present in the trial, but they can if they're campaigning against them.
Yeah, 100%.
And there's so much to talk about in that regard. So, I think that that's the way stronger case for them to make. But I guess final word on impeachment here.
Yeah.
Looking forward, ex-White House counsel Don McGahn is judicially being forced to testify, and so it'll be interesting to hear his testimony because he certainly is, an inner working official and someone that's very loyal to President Trump, even though he's no longer working at the White House, and knows what he's talking about in terms of the inner workings of the Trump administration. So if he speaks openly and truthfully, I think there may be a lot to learn from him. But I just love this quote from the federal judge that said he must testify. He said, "Presidents are not kings."
Yeah, I mean it's great. It's what you love to hear. And I think while it's a fun punchline, it's also true. I think that the fact that the administration is resisting this makes them look bad, and I also think it's undemocratic. And I think that
it's extremely punishable.
I think it's good that they're having to go through this process just because the American people deserve to have everything brought forth and presented, and then they can decide how they treat it. But the fact that Trump's dodging this at all is also a bad look for him. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but just something to think about.
So with the Democratic debate, Pete Buttigieg definitely saw a much larger focal point of attention than he had in the previous debates, given his recent uptick in polling, like we discussed last week. He's trending upward in Iowa. Usually, most polls have seen him about 1 to 2 points ahead of the coalition of Biden, Warren, and Sanders, but we've seen some that have him up by as much as 5 to 7 points. So he's certainly been looking good lately, and his experience came into a lot of question on the Democratic debate.
Yeah, he was the subject of a lot of attacks in an otherwise pretty amicable debate. I mean, Pete got attacked, Tulsi was pretty aggressive, but at the top there wasn't that much sparring and infighting. I mean, they mostly were like, I'm not going to do anything that might help me a ton or hurt me a ton. I'm sort of content with where I am, and I'm just going to stand on my policy and hope that wins it.
Part of that was a function of the moderation of the debate. The questions were very targeted towards specific candidates. For instance, they asked Amy Klobuchar specifically about remarks she had made. They asked Tulsi Gabbard about remarks she had made. They targeted minor candidates, and they asked questions specifically to the candidates. To talk about Joe Biden, one of his questions was about what he would do to protect women in violence against women nationally. And as Joe Biden tends to do, he did have a gaffe when talking about it. He started by saying that he wanted to stop women from being assaulted by men, and that there's never a reason that a man should put a hand on a woman except in self-defense, which happens rarely. And then he proceeded to say that he wanted to keep punching we just had to keep punching and punching and punching and punching at domestic abuse. And it got a headline, and it's funny, and it's what should be expected from Joe Biden at this point. I think everyone who's been following the campaign can see that he's going to do better and better the less he has to talk. He's not a great orator, and he continuously makes gaffes. Later in the debate, he was being slightly attacked by Cory Booker on regards of race, and Joe Biden was trying to bring up the point that he has the most support of any candidate on the stage from the African American community, which is true, and most experts think that's widely due to his association with President Obama.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Cory Booker was attacking him and bringing out that he hasn't necessarily been the best for African Americans in his history, and that he probably wasn't necessarily the best choice for them going forward. And Joe Biden was making the point that he has all this support, and again, he has a gaffe. Every time he talks in this debate, he has a gaffe. He is trying to say that he has support from the black community. He's got the most black leaders in support of him. He has the only African American female senator ever elected, throwing in his support. And the way the camera is positioned, it has Cory Booker, who he's supposedly talking to, and Cory Booker interjects with, "That's just not true." And then the camera cuts to Kamala Harris.
Looking flabbergasted.
Who is not the first African American female woman elected to the Senate, but is currently in the Senate as an African American female woman. And Joe Biden quickly corrected himself and said that he actually meant the first female African American person elected to the Senate, but the damage was done, and he made the gaffe, and he has to stop talking. Someone has to get him to stop talking.
Yeah, and it brings up another question, like, to what extent can we say, oh, that's just Joe every time he makes a gaffe?
Just a quick aside from the debate, he was being interviewed and being asked in Iowa about who he was looking at for VP, and it was mostly targeted to the female question, like, you're obviously not a woman, and how are you going to look out for women in your presidency? Question along those lines. And so he said, like, I'm very much looking at female vice presidents for my campaign. And so they asked, like, who specifically, and he couldn't come up with a single name. He just described them as their position titles as opposed to actually recognizing them by name, which goes back to the gaffe. So he mentioned Stacey Abrams, but he said the person that should have been governor of Georgia. And then he said Sally Yates, but he just said the assistant to the attorney general in the Obama administration. And then he said the two female senators from New Hampshire, and by that he was meaning Jeanne Sheehan and Maggie Hassan. But he's got to be able to come up with those names if he's looking at them for vice president. I mean, that's just an alarming gaffe, I thought.
Yeah, and again, he's been doing this for years and years and years, and it's, to some extent, I'll give it to the guy. I mean, it's somewhat charming. Like, he's an old man, he's, innocent, and he's on my side, and he's not really tuned in to the political, glib that everyone else does. But it's also, like, you got to know your stuff. And I don't know how much that's helped or hurt him, but I think the more this happens, the more people are going to think, I don't know if I want this, this dude standing before other countries and speaking on my behalf, because if he does that and it's not about something silly that you can brush off and it's something serious, then he could really put off or start a lot of stuff that he doesn't really want to get into.
Right. Well,
I disagree with that. I disagree with the idea that the more he does this, the more people are going to shift away from him. I think in a lot of ways, like President Trump, Joe Biden's been doing this for so long that anyone who would be dissuaded by it has already been dissuaded.
I think that's a fair point. Everyone knows what they're getting themselves into, but at the same time, I don't want to get all over the man for it, but at the same time, it certainly is a problem that needs to be reconciled with. There are certain aspects of the presidency, and plenty of them, that require being articulate.
Yeah, and I think
yes,
simple mispronunciation or something like that in a press conference or in a room with the president or something like that, where you say something but mean something else, can actually matter a great deal.
It matters far less when he's dealing with the American public. That's
Right.
concerning, as you said, for foreign relations.
Yeah.
I think he
Yeah,
says
that's the
something and
biggest deal.
defends a foreign leader, we could get ourselves into some sticky territory.
Well, and perhaps the most alarming thing, like on the stage last night, he realized he'd messed up, but a lot of the time, he just keeps going. And it's like, Joe, you have to realize what you did and correct it at the time. Like, if you're going to
Well,
mess
that's
up.
the problem, is if you're in the room with the president of, if you're in the room with President Xi and you don't correct yourself, that's a problem.
Yeah, it's a big issue, and he just keeps going and going and going, and half the time he thinks no one else noticed and he can just brush it off, and then the other half of the time,
I wonder if he notices.
yeah, it's, oh my god, does he really not understand what he just said, or why that's wrong, and it's, again, like you said, I don't know how much people are actually going to read into that. We've elected Donald Trump, who, while it may not be an
It's not as bad as the
unintentional-
Twitter thing.
Yeah, it's not an unintentional gaffe by Trump. It's
But-
still a flamboyant, inflammatory statement that hasn't really put off his support.
I think that the hope is that we move away from having a president that reflects badly on the country.
Right. And
And
I think that's a ding against Joe Biden. As far as us, I don't think the American public will be swayed by that.
I think he's a good and honorable man, but at the same time, he's not the best example or image to present of our country abroad.
Agreed.
I think everyone here can agree with that,
Yeah.
and probably a good percentage of Americans. Nothing against the guy. I happen to like him a lot personally, but I just think that
Yeah, it's easy to
image
see
is a
him.
huge thing in foreign policy, and we're have a buffoon in office right now, and you don't want to go to somebody that
is the same, and in a very different way, but
Right.
also comes off as a buffoon. I don't think Joe Biden is actually unintelligent, but if you listen to him talk, he sure seems like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And another big thing, just to touch on that one more time, is Trump is an older guy and Joe is an older guy, and they've both been having trouble, or not having trouble, but they both have these gaffes, and it's making you wonder, with an aging presidential field, do Americans feel comfortable electing someone who's 70 plus years old, given that we usually choose someone younger than that? And I saw a recent poll by Gallup. It said 30% of Americans have hesitations voting for an older presidential candidate because of what Joe and Trump have done.
Well, and I think the Me Too movement have shifted a lot. The Democrats really, I don't think, want an old white man in the light of the Me Too movement and the whole push for diversity. So there's that aspect too.
Yeah.
I don't know if the average American voter is really going to be dissuaded by those physical characteristics of Joe, but it's certainly something that's going to come into play in the primary, which he certainly has far from having won.
And that's probably some of what's been helping Mayor Pete, is that he's younger and he's a little more spirited, and people can relate
Certainly
to
is
him a little more.
energizing, yeah.
Yeah, as opposed to Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden.
Yeah.
And he's been doing better in Iowa. But again, he's a Midwestern politician, so
Yeah.
Iowa should be one of his strong points.
But he's not doing too badly in New Hampshire either. This is post-debate poll from Suffolk University of 500 likely voters, and the pollster has an A- rating from 538, so certainly a reputable poll. Had Sanders at 16%, Warren at 14%, and then Buttigieg at 13%, and Biden at 12%. So
Yeah, and that's
he's right there in New Hampshire, which is one of the most liberal states in the country, so
I don't see any avenue to him actually getting first or second in New Hampshire.
Well,
It'd
I
be very
think if he
difficult for
wins
him to do
Iowa, that again, Iowa, people see, oh my God, he won Iowa, and now maybe I'll go out and vote for him.
Yeah.
And we've seen that in the past. While I'm not saying that's going to happen, I think if he wins Iowa, he'll see a bump just generally across
Yeah.
the board.
And our friends at 538 did point me to this poll from St. Anselm College, which had 512 registered voters. And again, New Hampshire, they actually had Buttigieg up 10%, 25% support versus 15 for Warren and Biden, and Sanders at 9.
In New Hampshire.
So I certainly don't think that Buttigieg is actually ahead by 10%.
I think our
in New
friends might have
Hampshire.
misled you there, bud.
But, you know, that certainly is suggesting that there is at least a pathway to him winning the state, which would be huge for his campaign.
It's a necessity. If he doesn't get first or second in either Iowa or New Hampshire, his campaign's over.
No, but if
He
he
will
wins
lack the momentum.
Iowa, he doesn't need to.
Correct.
He can place
He's gotta
third
take-
in New Hampshire, and that's fine. But if he wins Iowa and then he wins New Hampshire,
He's looking a lot like a front runner to a lot of people.
which is
And-
going to affect the way people vote in
Agreed.
the ensuing primaries. So that
And-
would be huge. I certainly think he could take Nevada if he wins those first two, because Nevada's one of those states where they could go for any of the front runners.
And he needs money. That's the thing that's going to keep him down. And many people are speculating currently that some of his high polling in Iowa and New Hampshire is a result of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren not yet pouring in their donation money. Those are the two candidates who are having the
Yeah,
least
well-
trouble raising funds, and they have yet to really begun campaigning in Iowa and New Hampshire
There
in
was
full
news
force.
about a big ad buy that's upcoming by Sanders that is actually going to be in the ballpark of the Bloomberg $31 million ad buy. So we'll see what effect that has on the polling. But post debate, 538 does a thing with Ipsos Knowledge. It's called the Ipsos Knowledge poll, and it tracks like the percentage of Democratic primary voters that would consider voting for said candidate. And so Biden's percent was prior to the debate at 53.9, and it increased to 55.6. Warren's was at 42.9 and increased to 43.9. Sanders has actually went down from 41.1 to 39. And then Buttigieg had a huge jump from 25.6 to 31.9. And Harris also had a jump from 18.4 to 21.5. So, considering the great magnitude of attacks that he received in terms of his experience and
Well, and he defended them very well.
qualifications for the presidency, a 6-point jump in terms of voters who would consider voting for him in the primary is huge for Buttigieg, but he still has a lot of ground to make up on the two frontrunners.
He suffered one of the most difficult questions that I think was asked of the night. The moderator asked Mayor Pete whether or not he would continue the Trump farm subsidies. It's a very difficult question for him to have to answer because the base of his support is currently living off those subsidies.
Right.
And if he says he's going to take them away, he could lose a lot of support. But another piece of his campaign is that he has to appeal to the country as a whole, who doesn't want to continue basically any policy, at least on the Democratic side, that President Trump has been doing, is going to be innately averse to continuing the Trump farm subsidies.
Yeah, but in defense of the question, I mean, it is fundamentally a Democratic Party policy position to have that subsidy in the first place. Like as a general rule, they're in favor of bailing out those people versus the Republicans would prefer if there was no subsidy whatsoever.
Well, some Republicans, I don't know if you can say that right now, but there's certainly
like on principle.
On
principle,
no.
agreed.
So if he came out in support of the subsidy, I don't think that that's going to kill him in terms of Democratic circles. Like he's supporting subsidizing farmers who need
agreed.
the subsidy in order to earn a living. So it would be kind of undemocratic party in order to take that subsidy that they need for their living away from the farmers.
He tried to dodge the question when it was first asked.
Well, that's no surprise.
Right.
I mean, this was a debate.
But then the moderator, I've said the moderators were very good. The moderator forced him to answer. She says to him, I don't remember what name she called him by, but she said,
Probably
please
Mayor
answer
Pete.
the question.
Yeah.
And he ended up answering, and his answer was, yes, but we won't need them.
Well, I think that's as good an answer as you can
Yeah,
get. and
agreed.
I think that helps
And that
him.
would be the hope. I mean, if people aren't going to be able to support themselves as farmers, I think from their party's standpoint, then they need a subsidy to get in there and help them get themselves above water. But
Well,
their ultimate goal is to create an economy in which the subsidies are not necessary.
Right.
As are Republicans, it's just they have different methodologies for doing it.
No one wants to live on handouts from the government from the rest of their lives.
Right.
That's
And his farming policy has been a big key for his campaign.
Right.
He's came out against the tariffs and how it's killing the American farmer, and I think that he believes that if he takes the right trade policy and solves all that crap with China, that the subsidy will no longer be necessary because the farmers will be making a lot more money off of their goods.
right, and that's what he was trying to
consistent
say.
with his campaign. So I think he did an excellent job.
And I think he's an adept politician. He comes out well in
he's an
debate.
extremely adept.
Yeah, and that's what's helping him a lot, because the biggest thing
He's so
I think holding
polished,
him back
so
is the
polished.
fact
The inverse
that,
of Joe Biden.
yeah, people say, I mean, I love you, but you're a city mayor, you don't know what you're doing, and then he steps up on a national stage and does well. I mean, you're saying Joe Biden over here is a seasoned politician, and you are supposedly not, and you sound like you know what you're talking about, you're quick on your feet, you know your stuff, and he can't even look to his left and see the black senator standing there.
Yeah, my only concern with
And-
Buttigieg is if he knows what he's doing to the level to be president. I have no concerns about his ability to handle meetings with foreign advisors and or foreign leaders and all the ins and outs of speaking publicly or privately as president, because he certainly can do that extremely eloquently. I just don't know whether he has the seasoning and experience in terms of actually dealing with these real world problems to actually be able to solve the issues that
And
are
that's
best for this
well
president.
founded, but just
But
on
they
the
didn't-
eye test, it gives you a little
Yeah.
more assurances.
And
that
the
he knows
Democratic
what he's doing.
candidates did not do a good enough job of highlighting that aspect of his inexperience and
No.
trying to attack him at the debate, which is, I think, why he didn't really get hurt.
No,
There
I
wasn't
mean,
much room for attacks in the debate, and that's what we saw. We didn't see anyone really come under much fire. If you watch clips, you see really the few moments where there were this conflict, but in the full stretch of the debate, there was very little of candidates attacking each other. It was
Yeah.
primarily candidates on the defense because the questions were so aggressive.
Right.
I mean, that question they asked Pete was
A good
very
question,
similar.
yeah.
Good question. It puts him on the defensive. He has to be tactful with his
But
words.
no one else is going to step in there. I mean,
Right.
I'm sure anyone wants a chance to speak, but it doesn't really open the door for that.
Right.
The only real head-to-head confrontation we saw was the one with Harris and Gabbard, which I thought, even though everyone said that Harris won, I thought that was bad editing of the clips on Twitter. I mean, I thought Gabbard handled that excellently when she was pushed about, constantly being on Fox News during the Obama administration and being someone that doesn't really fit in with the mainstream of the Democratic Party by Kamala Harris. She just responded basically by talking about how Harris can't provide any substantive argument to her policies on foreign policy and things like that are fundamental to her campaign. So she's attacking her what she chooses to do in her time off as a congresswoman, and that she felt that was unfair. And
yeah, I mean, it makes Harris look to me like a little shallow, and it makes Tulsi seem like she's actually attacking.
right, her
something
point is
substantive.
there's nothing wrong with being on Fox News, and I think that that's a valid point. I mean, the hope is that any politician can go on any network and participate in the free exchange of ideas, and Gabbard was not anti the Obama administration. She disagreed with his policy on endless wars, which is why she was on Fox News, and she was criticizing him for some of those policies that he took in Syria and Iraq and Iran, among others. But aside from that, she was very pro-Obama. I mean, she's clearly a Democrat.
I don't think anyone who's looking at it from an objective perspective would debate that.
Yeah, but I thought she did a good job of handling the argument against Harris by, instead of posturing and going back and forth with her about what you can do and personality, she just would hit her back with substance, and I think that's the way to do it, and that's the intent of the debates.
Let's talk about Kamala Harris for a second. What do you think her role to the presidency is? Do you think she has a shot? And if she doesn't, does she know it? Is she trying to do something else here?
Well, I think she thinks she has a shot in the back of her mind. I mean, anything can change. But at the moment, she's got to be looking at the polls and looking at how well Pete's doing and how the front runners are pretty much static at the top and thinking, where's the room for me to improve here? And looking around and realizing that there isn't much unless something big changes. And I think she's looking at that and saying, all right, I think like I have decent numbers and there's clearly room to move here as evidenced by Pete, but I think she's still trying to find her spot and like pick that demographic that she's really going to go after to eventually get her to the presidency. But
I
again,
disagree with her still wavering and trying to pick her spot. I think based on her rhetoric during the last debate, it's very clear that she's trying to rebuild the Obama coalition, which is code for African American voters picking her as their choice.
Right.
yeah, but that's not going to happen. And
I
I think
think
that's
that's clear.
I don't think she has a pathway to the nomination. Like, I feel like she's eliminated at this point, but she has people below her that are still in. Like, I feel like for a lot of it, like ego-wise, she doesn't want to drop out before Booker does.
Well, she may be trying to run for some other office. That's kind of what I was trying to
I
get towards with my
understood.
question.
But-
Is she running for? Is she really running for vice president? Is she really running for AG?
There, the thing is that she's not like above fifth in any state, and there's a significant gap between her and the other four. Like, there's a number of states that I can point to where any of the other four are shuffled around and on the top. Like,
Mhm.
but she doesn't have that one state that she can point to. So I think she recognizes that this is like she would have to be stupid to not recognize that this is not her year. But in terms of what her angle is, I mean, I haven't heard her mentioned as being a vice presidential candidate in any circles. I don't think Pete would be inclined to pick her. I don't think that they agree on any issues, so there would be no reason for him to pick her. And Sanders is not going to get the nomination. I highly, highly doubt that Warren is going to pick her, and we just heard Biden's 4 female choices for the
And
vice
he's not going to
presidency,
pick her
and
either.
the only reason why he wouldn't have mentioned her for her 4 is if he's afraid of offending her, since she's still a candidate for the presidency. But
and I think that could happen.
I doubt
think
that-
he may pick her. It would be an excellent balance of his ticket.
yeah,
if
but
you're
he would be
concerned-
better suited taking Stacey Abrams because he still gets the balance, and she's the darling of the Democratic Party. And to be frank, she's a lot nicer than Harris.
Well, she came off very well in the first debate when she was able to go out on the offensive, but she can be very aggressive, and I think that can be off-putting to
And
voters.
I think that a lot of the complaints about Hillary Clinton, personality-wise, can be also applied to Harris, which is what I'm trying to say. Like, Stacey Abrams is a lot nicer, a lot like gentler of a politician,
And
a
I
lot
think-
more warming than Kamala Harris is.
And I think part of that, we're talking about these two women,
Right.
and I think part of that is the American people still have certain expectations that they want from a woman as a nominee.
Yeah, I mean,
and
it
it's
sounds
off-putting
bad
to
to
people.
say,
Right.
but like American people don't want a nasty woman as their
Right.
president or vice president. And once Trump called Clinton that, and a lot of people could say that was an accurate thing to call her, like, I think that hurt her a lot in terms of image to the American
Mhm.
people.
And it's a double standard, but it's one we have to talk about it because
It
it
factors
plays
into
into the
elections.
election,
And
right.
if you're looking like a vice president as someone that stands to your right and nods, you don't want some
Mhm.
steely-eyed, cold-hearted person
Yeah.
that's your choice. So I don't think she really fits into that picture. I could see her being AG, but I don't really know what her angle is. I think she wants more than
Well, I think
Senator
right
of
now
California,
she's-
but I can't think of
Yeah.
what it would be. I mean, AG is a good point,
Well, I think
considering her background
she's
in
just
California.
staying there right now because she can. Like, it's not like she has anything else to be doing right now. She's already a senator, and her upside is a lot greater than her downside is at this point.
Oh, like she gets her name out, it could be
Yeah.
very beneficial for her.
Yeah, I think, and she's young, relatively. She's young enough to be gearing up for, 2024 as well. I think there's just getting her name out there and being on a stage with millions of Americans watching is good
Yeah.
for her overall.
But at one point, she thought that she had a chance at the
Yeah,
nomination.
that's
I mean,
true.
that's undeniable because she is not like Buttigieg or Gabbard or any of those people that needed, or Yang, that needed this presidential run in order for the average American to know her name. I mean, most people knew who Kamala Harris was.
Yeah,
She
that's
had
true.
more name recognition than most of the people that are running for the Democratic nomination. You could say tied with Warren prior to the campaign, and
Trump's
then
comments.
second only to Biden.
I don't know if I'd throw Bernie Sanders above her, of course.
third, and then they're behind Biden and Sanders. I miss Sanders, thank you. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't like her motivation from the beginning wasn't name recognition, but she could be staying in to fuel a later run for the presidency. But I don't ever see her being the nominee for the Democratic Party unless it's a extremely weak field. Like if you pit her against Sanders, I think she wins.
Well, I think it could be a weak field in 20. I mean, no one really jumps to mind as an obvious Democratic candidate in 2024, given how old all the front. I mean, Pete being the exception, but beyond that, they're all going to be.
It depends on what happens, though. Like if Trump wins re-election, it could be the same circle again. There are a couple people that they've pinpointed, some governors and stuff like that, as potential presidential candidates a couple of years down the line, a few young congressmen and women. But if the Democrat wins the presidency in 2020, there's no sense talking about 2024 because it'll be them.
Right, it'll be them.
If Trump is removed from office, that's a whole different ballgame in 2024. And it depends on who the Republican nominee is also going to weigh into which Democrats run. Like, if it's looking from the very beginning like Nikki Haley is going to be the Republican nominee, I think a good chunk of, like, the top-tier Democrats that are not progressive but are more moderate-minded, like Buttigieg and Biden,
will hold out,
will not run in that election because they'll see that they're going to have a harder path at winning the nomination against somebody as graceful as Nikki Haley. The progressives will still be fired up, like Republican bad, we need to run against them, but like I don't think that Buttigieg's ideology is going to like be that affected by a Haley presidency. Like I think it'll be a pretty agreeable presidency for him and people like him, and so I think that then, like if it's clear that she's going to be the nominee, you'll see a pretty weak Democratic field in 2024. But if it's looking like Pence is going to be the nominee, you're going to have candidates lining up to the moon to run against Pence.
It's a very difficult road for her to maintain a frontrunner position. I think she has a lot of difficult stuff in her past, especially as the way people are taking her.
Nikki Haley does?
No, Kamala Harris.
As
people are taking her as a progressive candidate, or at least a more progressive candidate.
Well, some days she's progressive and some days she's not progressive. It depends on how she wakes up.
But if she maintains the frontrunner position for any period of time, as we saw her moving up after the first Democratic debate, she's just going to get hammered into the ground. There's a ton to dig up in her past as her as a DA in California.
She slept her way to the top.
And there's the issue of her department engaging in forgery of evidence.
So that's the other thing is I don't know whether she wants to open herself up to the scrutiny that a nominee from one of the two major parties would undergo.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I guess that brings us back to the point that she's looking for a higher office within this next presidency, not for 2024. Although again,
she certainly could be lining up for the AG job. I mean, the president is there. Like Christie was doing the same exact thing by staying in as long as he did in 2016, and he didn't get it because I think Trump thought he was a buffoon, which is ironic.
Well, he won Trump the nomination when he, burned down Marco Rubio in that debate.
It was certainly helpful to Trump, but I don't think Marco was going to win the nomination, regardless of whether that moment happened.
But much like Chris Haley. Much like Chris Christie, Kamala Harris again has that past, like Chris Christie and the Bridge, Kamala Harris, and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
It's hard to see them being how shady they are with.
But again, like the scrutiny of being Attorney General, like I think that any of the three that I could see winning the nomination, which would be Buttigieg, Warren, and Biden, could afford to have her be the Attorney General.
Agreed.
Like,
yeah.
Not that many people really pay attention to the whole nomination process of that, and not that many people care, and it's on C-SPAN, the proceedings and stuff, so it's not a huge flashy deal where it's going to be a big thing, and I think that they would have the votes to pass her as Attorney General.
Of course, I think she's qualified for the job. I think what we were talking about, her kind of steely-eyed, more aggressive demeanor would be
fits
beneficial,
the bill for
right?
An Attorney General, and the same thing with Christie. I mean, Christie is like a hard-nosed guy, and so a lot of people saw him as Attorney General material for that reason. And I think if you give Trump if you said to Trump, like, you can go back to 2016 and
he'd 100%.
pick your Attorney General, I think he certainly would pick Christie over Sessions.
Agreed.
Yeah.
When I thought Sessions was a terrible pick, like I have no problem with what Sessions did recusing himself from the Russian meddling investigation, but I thought he was just a crappy Attorney General other than that because he didn't do anything that the Trump administration had campaigned to do that would be headmanned by the Attorney General.
Well,
like,
you could take
like
that as
drugs.
a plus or minus. The best moment Joe Biden had in the debate, and I thought it was a really strong moment, and it resonated with me, was it was actually Bernie Sanders was asked a question about, it's been 3 years since Hillary Clinton was a nominee for the presidency, and there's still people chanting, "Lock her up," at Trump rallies. People have turned that on its head, and now at your rallies, Senator Sanders, they're chanting, "Lock him up." What do you tell these people? Is that good? Is that okay? And Bernie, he wavers around the question, but he ultimately says that when he was president, he would direct his AG to go after President Trump after he left office. And then they give Joe Biden, I don't remember how, but he manages to enter the conversation, and he says, no matter what happens in the impeachment, I will not direct an attorney general to go after President Trump. It is not the job of the president to direct who should be prosecuted.
Right.
I will appoint an attorney general that I believe has good judgment, and that attorney general will use their judgment to determine. If they believe that President Trump has violated the law, then they will go after President Trump on federal crimes.
Right. And that's the right answer to that question.
Oh, 100%. And it was.
But I also think that
it was wonderful.
Biden takes the Gerald Ford kind of mindset on this, which, for those who don't remember or weren't alive at that time, Ford, basically said that, he wasn't Nixon's guy and Nixon wasn't his guy. So he didn't have any ties to Nixon, and he had no problem if Nixon ended up getting thrown in jail. But his point was that the country needs to heal from this, and I'll sacrifice my approval ratings going in the toilet, which they did, by pardoning him, because I don't think that the American people can undergo the stress and strain on our country's democracy that a public trial of our former president would have on the country. And so he just simply decided that the right move was for the country to take a hard turn and move away.
And whether or not you believe it was the right move, I think you can agree it's a noble position to take.
Right.
He was sacrificing himself, and he believed what he was doing was right. It was not whether or not you believe it was right.
Is a different question.
Right.
But it's, you definitely can draw parallels, because I think from the mindset of Joe Biden, he thinks that the past 3 and all about to be 4 years that this country has just undergone is a horrible time and a black mark in American history. I think we can agree that that's what Biden feels has just occurred, and I don't think that he thinks that it's the right move to drag this out and have this be, something that we talk about for another 4 years, and have Trump be a central figure in American politics for another 4 years. He wants, okay, that sucked. Let's now move away from.
You don't see him pardoning him, do you?
If his attorney general decides to prosecute him, I don't think that Biden will pardon him. No,
I don't think Biden feels he can step in there.
He will. The attorney general, Biden won't say it publicly, but I think the attorney general would be strongly advised not to pursue charges on President Trump in a Biden presidency.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, he did. While he said he wanted to elect not an independent attorney general, but somebody who wouldn't just be his right-hand man, I do think Biden would
there are
make
certain
it clear
extenuating
that
circumstances, and while you can say it's wrong one way, I certainly don't think it's wrong the other way to say, I don't think you should press charges on the president. I have no issue with that, because he's saying it, not in a legal mind, he's saying it in terms of for effect on the nation, versus I do think that you should press charges on anyone. We can all agree is not really what the president is supposed to do. The president and the attorney general are supposed to be independent positions.
Right.
So.
And he said, our current president has directed his attorney general to do things and has used it as a branch of the executive office and used it to accomplish his goals. And he said, Joe Biden said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not President Trump. And he didn't say it outright, but implicitly he makes the comparison between President Trump and Senator Sanders.
Which is a good case.
It is a good case for Biden, and I think they have very different ways of branding themselves, but they have the same similar populist message.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, I guess
They're both populists. The same message would be a bit of a stretch.
Yeah,
but
no,
they're
I'm
both
not
populist
pushing
actors.
on that. I think Biden is less populist than Trump, though.
I'm talking about Bernie, Senator Sanders.
Oh yeah, extremely
Yes.
populist.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, I misheard you. All right, well that sounds like a good stopping point to
Yes.
me. So that's all the point that we have, all the time that we have. Jeez, thank you guys for tuning in. Till next week.